From the bomber's nose, the Thunderbolt looked dead already. 30,000 feet over Germany, the sky was a hard, brittle blue. Below, the heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force droned east toward Brunswick in a geometry of aluminum. Squadrons stacked and stepped, contrails braided like white ropes. Captain James "Red" Holt sat in his P-47 Thunderbolt, just off the starboard side of the lead box, engine rumbling, goggles streaked with frost and sweat. He'd already watched one fortress fall out of formation that morning, tail shot up, one engine coughing black smoke. He knew how this story usually ended. "Straggler, low 6, dropping back," someone called over the radio. Holt twisted in his harness. There it was, a B-17 slipping out of the protective shell, nose down a fraction, a dirty smoke trail marking it like a wounded animal. He pushed his throttle, but his own fuel gauge glared back at him. They were near the end of their escort leg. He couldn't just chase every limper halfway to Berlin. He watched, helpless, as the Luftwaffe appeared. Tiny black specks at first, then the hard, angled shapes of Bf-109s curving in from altitude. They didn't even look at the healthy formations. They went straight for the wounded fortress. Short bursts, precise, like men putting down an injured horse. A wing came off. The bomber rolled, trailing fire, and vanished into the haze. On the way back to England, the chatter on the radio was flat and bitter. They're hunting the cripples now. They don't want a fair fight, just easy meat. Back at Martlesham Heath that evening, in a smoky Nissen hut that smelled of wet wool and coal dust, Holt found Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss hunched over a scrap of paper, sketching. It was a P-47, all right, but not like any Holt wanted to fly. The drawing showed scorched paint, ripped panels, smoke pouring from one wing root. "You planning my funeral, Weiss?" Holt asked. Weiss didn't look up. "Maybe planning theirs," he said. "What if we give them exactly what they're looking for, and it doesn't die when they touch it?" To Weiss, the war over Germany looked like a series of sketches pinned to a wall. The operations board in the Martlesham Heath briefing room didn't show faces, just coded mission numbers, target names, arrows, and little colored pins marking losses. But if you watched long enough, patterns emerged. In early 1944, the pattern was ugly. The 8th Air Force was finally driving deep into the Reich, Brunswick, Oschersleben, the synthetic oil plants, pounding targets the Luftwaffe couldn't afford to lose. The price was paid in aluminum and blood. Bomber crews saw their odds in coffee cups and empty bunks, whole crews gone between breakfast and dinner. Weiss, pre-war commercial artist from Brooklyn, saw it in shapes and lines. He'd designed product posters before the war, made people want toothpaste and cigarettes with nothing but ink and imagination. The Army Air Forces had grabbed him, sent him through basic, then parked him where his half-dozen talents overlapped. Crew chief and occasional camouflage artist for a fighter squadron now flying P-47 Thunderbolts out of Martlesham Heath. His world was paint, sheet metal, and maintenance logs. Between jobs, he'd drift through debriefs, listening. "Lost another one off the low squadron, took flak, fell out," a bomber pilot would say. "Any fighters hit the main box?" someone would ask. Couple of half-hearted passes. Mostly they just hung back, waited for the stragglers. That was the key. If escorts were in position and the box stayed tight, German fighters had a hard time getting in. But the moment a bomber started trailing smoke, losing speed, or dragging a damaged engine, it might as well have painted a bullseye on itself. Luftwaffe pilots had learned to orbit behind and to the sides. watching for that one wounded duck to appear. The bombers couldn't help it. Ordnance blows off a panel, flak takes out an engine. That look of damage is baked into physics and bad luck. But fighters? Fighters could choose how they looked. Weiss pored over strike photos and gun camera stills, studying the way real damage showed up from 5,000 yards away. Smoke patterns, the way scorched metal dulled in certain light, how oil streaks crawled back along the fuselage. The artist in him recognized something the tacticians hadn't quite framed. The Luftwaffe was training its eyes to attack a picture. Smoke plus lagging plus ragged flight equaled attack now. If that picture could be faked, if a plane that was strong as an ox could be made to look like it was on its last legs, then maybe, just maybe, the hunters could be led onto someone else's gun sights. Sitting in the hut with his sketch of a wounded Thunderbolt, Weiss wasn't doodling for fun. He was drawing bait. For Holt, the problem didn't live on a chart. It lived in his headset. Mission after mission, the soundtrack was the same. Engines, wind noise, clipped radio calls, then the thin edge of panic when something went wrong. One morning, they were headed for central Germany again. The briefing had been the usual soup of arrows and altitudes, but everyone heard the subtext. Fighter opposition heavy. Expect determined attacks on stragglers. Over the target, flak rose in black, boiling flowers. Fortresses jolted and shuddered, contrails shredding into ragged scars. Holt's flight weaved above and to the side, the big P-47s like armored shepherd dogs. 2 engines out on that lead ship, his wingman said. He's not staying with them. Holt saw it. A B-24 sliding out of position, formation tightening up and flowing past it like a river around a rock. With 2 engines gone on one side, the Liberator couldn't hold altitude or speed. It trailed smoke so thick it looked like someone was painting a black road in the sky behind it. "Red flight, stay with the box," came the group controller's voice. "Repeat, stay with the box. We can't strip escorts for every cripple." Holt's hand tightened on the stick. Every instinct screamed to drop back, tuck in alongside that dying bomber, dare anyone to come close. But he knew the math. If his whole flight left, 10 other bombers might pay for it. Minutes later, the call came. "Bandit 6 low on a straggler. Multiple hits. She's going down." The voice cut off. Holt didn't need details. He could picture it perfectly. German fighters, disciplined and patient, waiting for exactly that sign. Smoke, lag, desperation, before swooping in to finish the job. Back at Martlesham, he found Weiss outside the hangar, staring at a fresh chalkboard of losses. "We get there too late," Holt said. "Every time. By the time we leave the box to help, they're already done." Weiss didn't argue. He just looked at the board a moment longer, then back at Holt. "So," he said slowly, "what if we don't try to get there? What if we make them come to us?" The idea sounded insane the first time Weiss said it out loud. They were in the mess that night, a low-ceilinged Nissen hut where condensation dripped from the ribs and cigarette smoke tried to beat the coal stove for dominance. Holt nursed a tin mug of something pretending to be coffee. Weiss turned his napkin sketch around so the pilots at the table could see it clearly. A P-47, nose down slightly, streaked with black. Chunks of cowling, missing. Smoke trailing from the wing root. It looked like a plane halfway to being a memorial. "Here's your cripple," Weiss said, "except it isn't." One of the younger pilots snorted. "You volunteering to fly that thing, Sarge?" "That's the point," Weiss said. "This is paint, sheet metal, trickery. Underneath, she's perfect. Full power, full guns, plenty of fuel. Holt set his mug down. Talk. Weiss leaned in. The Germans are keying off a picture. Smoke and torn-up skin mean weak, isolated target. So we give them that picture, but we control who it's attached to, when, and where. A couple of our birds drop back looking like they're on their last legs. The 109s and 190s commit. And when they do, he tapped the napkin where he'd drawn other clean Thunderbolts high above. We closed the curtain. At first, it got exactly the reaction you'd expect. You're asking us to fly around with a sign that says, "Please shoot me." They'll swamp you before we can help. What if they don't fall for it? Weiss took the hits and kept coming. You're already losing bombers who can't defend themselves. I'm saying we use fighters that can defend themselves, and we decide when the fight happens. It went up the chain. The squadron leader listened, chewed his lip, and passed it to the group. Somewhere between Martlesham and a desk at Fighter Command, the plan almost died in a pile of caution, but the numbers on the bomber loss charts were bad, too bad to ignore. In the end, the approval came down like a half-hearted blessing, a trial, limited and quiet. No paperwork spelling out fake damage decoys, no wide doctrine change, just a line in orders. 3 P-47s to be modified for special escort duties, volunteer pilots only. Weiss stared at the paper, then at the row of solid, unmarked Thunderbolts outside the hut. Time to turn them into liars. They started with paint. Weiss and his crew rolled 3 P-47s into a far corner of the dispersal, away from curious eyes. Under gray English skies, they went to work with brushes, spray guns, and an artist's ruthlessness. First came the smoke staining, long black tongues licking back from the cowlings and turbo outlets, feathered just the way real oil and exhaust streaked when an engine was hurt. Then, flak rash. Star-shaped bursts of bare metal where imaginary shrapnel had chewed through paint. Around panel lines they shaded fake scorching and primer, breaking up the Thunderbolt's smooth outline. They fabricated damage, too. Lightweight aluminum panels, cut, bent, and scorched with a torch, were bolted over intact skin so they jutted at odd angles. From a distance, it looked like cowling ripped half off, or access hatches hanging by one hinge. Up close, you could see the cheat, thin sheet, loose enough to flutter without stressing the airframe. Last came the smoke. Compact oil tanks and a small burner rig went into a gun bay and in the belly, with a simple switch run into the cockpit. Flick it on, and a dirty trail of engine fire smoke coughed out behind the aircraft, visible from miles away. When they were done, the 3 Thunderbolts looked wrong. Not like museum wrecks, but like planes that had taken a beating and somehow stayed in the air. Even hardened crew chiefs did a double take walking past. "You sure they're safe?" Holt asked, standing under his newly ruined jug. "Structurally," Weiss said, "as safe as any P-47. Visually?" He grinned. "They're a mess, just what we want." A few mornings later, the board read Brunswick again. Hours after takeoff over Germany, the pieces clicked into place. The bomber stream thundered on toward the target. Standard escorts prowled above and around. Then, as prearranged, Holt and the other 2 wounded P-47s eased back. They didn't fall out in a dramatic plunge. They just lagged. A few hundred yards, then more. Smoke rigs came on, a dirty gray smear curling behind them. They flew a little off-kilter, just enough wobble in their banks and altitude to look like men fighting damaged controls. German fighters appeared at altitude, dark crosses against the pale sky. They ignored the tight bomber boxes, their noses turned like compass needles, toward the three smoking, crippled escorts. Up high and off to one side, a second clean element of P-47s tightened formation and waited. The first pass came textbook. 6 BF-109s dropping into a shallow dive behind the bait, cannons ready. From their cockpits, this was easy money. In Holt's cockpit, everything was smooth. Engine, controls, gauges. Only the fake smoke and rattling panels sold the lie. He let the 109s close. Closer. Too close. "Easy, boys," he said on Squadron Freak. "Let them bite. Now." He slammed the throttle forward and rolled hard. The cripples suddenly weren't crippled at all. German firing solutions evaporated. At that instant, the high cover came down. 8 pristine Thunderbolts dropping out of the sun, wings already sparkling with muzzle flashes. Gun camera film later showed a blur of chaos, 109s filling the frame, then erupting under 50 caliber fire, wings and tails snapping off as they tumbled away. In less than 2 minutes, 4 German fighters were falling in flames. The rest scattered. On the way home, bomber crews talked about the luck of those 3 battered-looking escorts that somehow refused to die. Back at Martlesham Heath, Weiss watched the tally board update. Chalk ticks under enemy AC destroyed. "Not bad for a day's painting," Holt said, clapping him on the shoulder. Weiss just nodded. "Touch up the smoke streaks," he said. "We're going to need them again." The Brunswick trap wasn't a one-off stunt. It was a proof of concept. In the debriefing room, the intelligence officers tried to play it cool as pilots described the engagement. But the numbers spoke for themselves. A clean, lopsided slaughter of experienced German fighters who had walked willingly into the kill zone. Permission for further limited use came down almost immediately. Within a week, Weiss and his team had expanded the stable of imposters. More P-47s got the treatment. Smoke-stained cowlings, fake flak patches, detachable wreckage panels, and refined smoke generators that could be pulsed on and off to simulate faltering engines. Ground crews joked that they were becoming half mechanics, half makeup artists. The tactics settled into a rhythm. On raid after raid, one small wounded escort element would lag behind the bomber stream, playing the part of damaged stragglers. High above or off to the side, a clean element waited in silence. German fighters, conditioned by months of easy kills on real cripples, kept taking the bait. They came in confident. They left, when they left at all, as scattered wreckage. By the end of the month, squadron records and later reconstructions credit the 359th's decoy tactics, with roughly 40 German fighters destroyed for no decoy losses. Not all of those kills came from fake cripples, but enough did that pattern was unmistakable. Wherever Weiss's artwork went, the Luftwaffe paid more. Numbers on the bomber loss charts began to dip on days when the wounded Thunderbolts flew. For the first time in a long time, bomber crews heading for Germany could look back and know that sometimes, just sometimes, the weak-looking shape behind them was actually the deadliest thing in the sky. After the war, the world turned down the volume on stories like this. Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss went home to New York with a duffel bag and a head full of images. He slid back into the world of commercial art and design, signs, posters, campaigns, where fooling the eye was once again considered harmless. Somewhere in his paperwork, a line eventually credited him with advanced camouflage development and, according to later accounts, a Legion of Merit. The citation didn't mention P-47s that only pretended to be dying, but the pilots who flew them remembered. Stories like Weiss's sit at the edge of official history, too small to headline a campaign, but big enough to bend the numbers of who lived and who didn't. What you've heard is grounded in real units, real tactics, and documented deception methods, with some dramatized dialogue and detail. For deeper research, always go to wartime records and serious histories. If you want more forgotten World War II, stories about wild ideas that actually worked, help keep them alive. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family ever painted the enemy into a trap of their own.